Thank you so much. And thanks to GW, to the Dean, whom I'm sorry isn't here tonight, and my friend Megan. Where's Megan? Megan's right here, for inviting me to do this. I was thrilled to have the opportunity to do it. I want to know who's in the room, first of all. How many students? Who's a student here today? How many of you are graduate students? And so how many undergrads? That's really pretty awesome. Thank you very much for coming. How many faculty and staff are in the room? Terrific. What departments? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay. Who's here from off campus? And where are you all from? Where are folks from? Tell me where you're from. Okay, that's a good place to be from. I like being local too. What about you? Okay, great. Back here. Great. All right. Who else over here? Okay, great. Lots of different places. Terrific. I want to share with you some of the things that we're doing at DARPA, but as I walked around and looked at the student posters today, it just really resonated with me when I saw the breadth and the excitement of the work that all of you students are doing here at GW. I start my talk with this funny title because I recently learned that a century and a half ago, Franz Liszt, when he talked about writing his music in that era, he said his objective was to hurl a javelin into the infinite spaces of the future. And it made a tingle go up my spine because I thought, you know, at DARPA, we're in a completely different world. Our muse is technology, our mission is national security, but that's actually the spirit that inspires us every day in the work that we're doing. And I wanted to share with you some of the javelins we're hurling. But I actually think this is why engineering was something that excited me from an early age, and the passion I have for this enterprise that you all are engaged in educating the students, and then you students are going to go off and do amazing things. We actually have this privilege as engineers of getting to do the work that shapes possible futures, and I think that's a tremendous privilege. It's also a big responsibility for us. Let's see, how do I get my slides up here? DARPA Challenge. I know how to do it on here. There we go. Fantastic. Okay. So I'm just going to give you 3 examples today, and I'm happy to take questions and comments afterwards. I wanted to give you 3 examples of things that we are doing. The first is in the context of accessing space. In our national security realm, our ability to use the space domain is critical to everything that we do. It's critical to the way we fight today and keep the nation strong and safe. It's essential to every civilian activity today. I don't know about you, but I can't get anywhere without the blue dot on my phone. That's about getting access to my position and location information through GPS satellites. It's become integral to modern society. But in fact, the way we access space today is not a good story. We got here for a lot of good reasons, but where we are in the Defense Department is accessing space is something that costs many, many billions of dollars to build a big complex satellite and then to wait often years to be able to launch it from fixed sites around the world. Commercial technology and the explosion in microelectronics and microsystems, software and algorithms, all of those core technologies now mean that we can build very, very small satellites that can do some amazing things. If you follow what's happening with the commercial space startup world, it's very exciting to see entrepreneurs in space. Who would have thought? But that's now possible. That's because satellites got small. Launch is still something that takes years to schedule. And even if you're hitching a ride on someone else's bigger payload, it's a very expensive undertaking. That's just not going to cut it for the Defense Department, or actually I think for what we're going to want to do commercially in the long run as well. So DARPA set out to start a program called ALASA, and I'll show you a video that brings the idea to life. But in essence, the idea is to radically change how we access space. It starts by being able to put a payload that includes the satellite onto a conventional aircraft on a conventional runway. So this can be any runway in the world. We can access it on 24-hour call-up rather than 24 months. When you get the flight up high enough, you can orient the launch of that payload in any direction. And as it separates, you'll see that the stages of the rockets that are on that payload activate. And as the atmosphere slips away, it becomes very, very quiet up there, and eventually we separate all the pieces, and what's left behind is this last component that's going to launch the little satellite. This is where the DARPA logo enters low Earth orbit. So here's the payload that we really care about, the satellite itself unfurling its solar arrays to start booting up and start operations a day after we knew we needed it on orbit. A radical game changer, something that we're in the middle of working on today, is going to require some very different technologies, but also operating methodologies to break away from this model that we've got today. So that's one example where we're rethinking complex military systems. Let me give you a second example from a completely different world. This is one of our programs in the big data arena. Almost every interesting story at DARPA, probably anywhere in the world, begins with a passionate individual program manager. The program manager in this case is a fellow named Chris White. Chris had been working big data problems for us in Afghanistan and was able to do some amazing things for commanders in the field there. He became aware in his work at DARPA that law enforcement, as they're trying to chase down trafficking networks, human trafficking networks, and part of the sex trade that goes on, he came to learn from his law enforcement colleagues that the way they do that is sort of the way, they sort of wander through the vastness of cyberspace the way any of us would search for something on the internet. They use commercial tools like Google and Bing. They do single-threaded searches through this seemingly infinite space. And from that, they're able to piece some things together. But it's very clear that in that vast online space, malignant actors, malignant behavior is able to fester and grow and to use that infrastructure that we all use for so many good reasons. They're able to pervert it and use it for their very, very deleterious effects. Chris was determined to find a different way to tackle that problem. There are only a couple of problems with this sort of classic way of doing it. Number one, of course, is that it's slow and arduous. But number two, the commercial search engines, as you probably know, Google and Bing only index a fraction of the vastness of what's publicly available or visible on the web today. That's appropriate for their commercial business models, selling advertising, but it does not allow us or law enforcement to be able to see the much vaster space that's out there. Chris set out to build a program to do domain-specific deep web search. He started with a little seedling to see if this made sense, and let me show you what came out of the seedling. Because they were working with law enforcement, they were working with a group that was focused on the Dallas, Texas region. So Chris and his team scooped up the back page ads for the Dallas, Texas region. This is where a lot of the sex trade has moved currently. What they did was look not only at public information, they were looking at ads, which is about as public as information gets. And their tool was able to very quickly look across a vast number of sites and linkages, but to start to look for common elements that popped up over and over again. So phone numbers or links that seemed to be prevalent from one ad to the next. And from that, they built a cluster map. I love the big data guys. They're always building these marvelous maps, and they say, see? And I say, no, I don't see. What the heck is that? So what this is every node here is, for example, is a phone number. It's a common element. And the more clustered they are, the more likely it is that number's, that's a map just telling you, yeah, this number shows up a lot. Our team took the 600 phone numbers that seemed to pop up the most frequently from this cluster map, and they threw it over the wall to law enforcement. The law enforcement team compared those 600 numbers to their arduously built, manually crafted, very law enforcement sensitive database of bad actors and bad acts. And they were shocked with what they found, because among those 600 numbers were numbers that tied to over 400 known criminal violations. And that was interesting enough. That really got their attention. But even beyond that, they found that in that batch of 600 phone numbers were numbers that tied to 30 financial transactions that ring the regions around North Korea. Now, this is not a smoking gun, but what it does is it starts narrowing their search from this infinite space to now a very rich data set that they can really use to focus their search. From this work, district attorneys today are getting indictments and pursuing cases and starting to have a much higher, much more powerful tool to go after this horrible, horrible thing that's going on with sex trafficking around the world. That's an example from the world of big data, just one of many things that's happening in that area. Let me finish with a third example that's one piece of something that's going on that was very visible when I was out looking at the posters here today. One of DARPA's jobs is to constantly be looking at the research horizon and looking for the places in research where the pot is bubbling, where something is happening. Sometimes all that means is great research is going to happen and Nobel Prizes and lots of papers. Once in a while, it means that that's the place where the seeds of the next technological surprise is going to come from, and that's our business. That's what we're really interested in. Today, one of the most vigorously boiling pots is where biology is intersecting with the physical sciences and engineering and with information technology. You all are all over it, and you know exactly what I'm talking about because you're doing it here as well. But this is an area that has become an increasing focus at DARPA. We recently started an office to pull all of our efforts in the biological technologies together and really drive that area more aggressively. We're doing a variety of things in that office, from synthetic biology to work to outpace infectious disease. But I want to tell you a story about one of the programs that's in the portfolio relating to neurotechnologies. This is another story that starts with a passionate program manager. In this case, it was, at that time, Colonel Jeff Ling, who was serving in the Army as an Army doctor. Jeff is a neurointensivist. He, among others, treated Gabby Giffords when she was so horribly injured. But his day job as an Army doctor was to treat service members. And as he deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, he saw firsthand the price that is paid when our nation sends our young people into those kinds of conflicts. He saw that in the loss of life, and he saw that in the loss of limbs. Jeff Ling returned from theater, returned to his job as a DARPA program manager with a fiery passion about creating a prosthetic capability for our wounded warriors that would be a big advance over what is still today the state of the practice, which is a very simple hook for upper limb prosthetics. Lower limb prosthetics, we can do amazing things already. Upper limb prosthetics, if you think about the number of degrees of freedom, the dexterity, the amount of control that you have with your upper limbs, that is a much harder challenge, and we really had not made a lot of progress past the hook. Jeff started a program. It had two branches. The first branch was to develop a very sophisticated prosthetic arm with those degrees of freedom, but something lightweight enough that it could actually be used. An early version of that is controlled by movement on other parts of your body, very simple control system. That early version has actually come through FDA approval, and we're very excited that that's going to start being available now to amputees. But remember that Jeff is a neuroscientist, and so the other part of Jeff's program was to understand how neural signaling in our motor cortex controls this very sophisticated, complex limb that we all get to have. And in that work, through a lot of early research, we were finally at the point where we were able to do the first human trials. And so a couple of years ago, we enrolled the first few patients. The video I'm going to show you is a woman named Jan. Jan became a quadriplegic through a degenerative disease. She'd been a quadriplegic for a number of years when she learned that in Pittsburgh, where she lives, that the University of Pittsburgh was recruiting patient volunteers to be among the first to do this kind of breakthrough research. And Jan volunteered to have surgery to place two small implants on the surface of her brain, on the motor cortex, from which the wiring was placed to the two posts. And you can see the researcher there with the gloves is placing the probes now on these posts that are on top of Jan's head. And let me show you what Jan can do.
5 months after the surgery, We came back to see whether she would be able to control the robotic arm with nothing but her thoughts. They plugged her brain into the computer, and this is what we saw.
I can move it up and straight down and left and right and diagonally. I can close it and open it, and I can go forward and back.
That is just the most astounding thing I've ever seen. Can we shake hands?
Sure.
No, really.
Yeah.
Like, come right over here?
Yes, you come over
Okay.
there. Let me grasp your hand there. There we go.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
And I can do a fist bump if you'd like.
That's amazing.
Generally is amazing what she's been able to do. And I think, you know, I had just shown up at DARPA a couple of years ago, and Jeffling trotted upstairs and says, "Wait till you see what we just did." And he described this work to me. He told me about Jan, and I saw the earlier videos of what she was able to do. And Jeff said to me, "We've opened a door," because we started doing this work because of our objective of restoring function. But of course, once you see what's possible here, you realize that, in fact, we have opened a door that on the other side is some future in which we may be able to free the human brain from the limitations of the human body. And we've been thinking long and hard about how we want to proceed. We did not, you know, throw that door open and go rushing through, because I think this is a good point to talk about what I think is one of the most important responsibilities of my agency, but also of the engineering community. We pursue powerful technologies like this because of their potential. And for DARPA, this is our day job. We were created specifically to look for, to drive these very powerful, new, surprising technological capabilities. So that's important that we continue to do that. But we also know that in doing this work, we are often going to be the first to stumble into a lot of very challenging societal questions about how we want to use technologies like this. At DARPA, we describe for ourselves two roles. One is not to shy away and simply to live in the safe places, because I think that would be a violation of our core mission as an agency and the job that we need to do for our country. But with that comes a second responsibility, and that is to engage the discussion about how we as a society are going to choose to use these kinds of technologies. I don't want to live in a society where a bunch of technologists sitting in an office building in Arlington, Virginia, doing national security stuff make up the answers. So I do not think it should be or is our responsibility to tell you what the answers are. That's something that is going to take people with a number of different perspectives, and it will be something that will be societal choices that play out over a period of time. In doing this research, any of you who work with humans or animals know that there are very clear requirements and rules about how we do that respectfully and ethically, and processes in place. That's actually not the hard part. The much more interesting part, I think, is what comes after our research, how we as a society choose to go forward. And so to engage that discussion, you'll find in areas like this or in synthetic biology or when we're dealing with privacy and data issues, what we will often do is put together a collection of experts with very different perspectives on the various sides of the issue and use them both to inform our judgments about how to think about our research, but also to show them where the technology is going, and so that they can help engage a broader community, because I think ultimately that is going to be necessary. Sometimes technology can actually help with some of those choices, but I want to be a little humble about how much, even, you know, as great as I think engineering is, I think we need to understand that there's a much bigger picture that we are part of. So I mentioned that partly because I want you to know how we think about it at DARPA, but I also think this should be integral as we all think about our responsibilities as engineers. So I want to thank you again for the chance to be here. I'm very happy to take any questions or comments, but mainly want to say, especially to you students, engineering is, I think, one of the most exciting pursuits that any of us could be fortunate enough to have, and I'm excited to see what you're going to go do. Go be awesome. Thank you very much. Is there time? Do you have a few minutes for questions? Okay, sure. Any questions or comments or thoughts? Please.
Private industry has already developed some similar launch systems to the first one you mentioned. How does DARPA's initiative going to interact with the private
Yeah, so let me back up a couple of steps. First of all, everything that we do, we're 200 government employees in an office building. So we have these dreams, but then they actually get done by contracts where we work with a very broad swath of industry as well as universities, other kinds of labs. So you'll find that, in fact, that work and many others are done with private companies. In that particular case, part of what we're trying to achieve is a military launch capability. There's specific things that we're trying to achieve there that I think are a little bit different, but very, I think it's a dream that lots of people have, and I think that, and part of that program has worked with some of the commercial players as well.
Other questions?
Please. DARPA is part of the Defense Department, and we are about a quarter of the science and technology funding in the Defense Department. That totals about $12 billion. We are just under $3 billion right now. That's been, DARPA's budget has bounced up and down over 6 decades that we've been around. It declined substantially as the defense budgets were coming down over the last few years. The last 2 or 3, it's been stable. And I think we are adequately funded for our mission. We don't have a cover the waterfront mission. We have a very specific mission, and I think for that job, our funds are reasonably adequate. Of course, that's something I always worry about. I think even more important, though, is that in the department and in the White House, both sides of the aisle, in Congress, we have the support to execute on our mission, and no one is telling us to, go do something incremental. They want us to do our core mission, and I think that's at least as important as the dollars. Please.
With what happened to Sony and cybersecurity challenges, and many think of it as really the next possibility of survival for a nation, is DARPA doing anything dealing with cybersecurity?
Yes, we've got quite a lot going on in cybersecurity. As with other things at DARPA, we are not an operational agency. Our job is really to try to figure out how we flip the game in cybersecurity. Today, I think companies and government, including DoD, what everyone is doing right now is patch and pray as fast as we can. And it's really all we've got, so we should do it as fast as we can. However, what we're trying to do at DARPA is work on foundational new approaches to cybersecurity that will outpace the rate of growth of the information explosion, and with it all the vulnerabilities that come. So just to give you one simple example of that, DARPA's had a series of challenges where people compete for cash prizes. We have a new one that's called the Cyber Grand Challenge. It's going to be a league of their own for machines to do a capture the flag style cyber competition. So automated systems for cyber defense, fighting against each other. And just as computers learned how to play chess with a league of their own and got better and better until they could beat human beings, we think that's going to be very possible here. And I think it's an example. If you're dealing with cyber assaults that are coming at machine speed and are automatically generated at machine speed, you're dead in the water if the only way you can respond is lots of people typing as fast as they can. So I think it's a good example of looking for those scalable kinds of solutions, one part of a much larger portfolio. Please.
This is sort of a curveball, but I'll ask anyway.
Oh, go for it.
Is DARPA dealing with the question of whether or not the internet can become conscious?
Wow. Well, so first you'd have to have like a 4-hour discourse involving some alcohol about what consciousness is, I think.
Where?
I'm with you. But I actually think the word conscious is the interesting part of that question, and I do not have an answer to that one. But I think it's very worth asking.
Does the intelligence community also interact with and keep value out of what DARPA is doing? Does it have its own kind of
Yeah, we do a little bit of work with the intelligence community, and over the years, some of our tools, especially on the information side, have been used there. In fact, the ARPA model has been replicated in a couple of places, ARPA-E in the Energy Department, and there is an intelligence ARPA and IARPA that both of those are examples of much newer entities that are just getting started. But again, as part of a larger R&D strategy to have a component that is about only thinking about big game-changing breakthroughs, not the incremental day-to-day problems, I think is actually a very smart strategy. I think it'll be very effective for them in the long run. Okay?
How does DARPA differentiate your sort of S&T efforts in 6.1, 6.2 areas versus O&R or the services? How do you sort of differentiate what is defense-wide versus the service?
I think that comes back. The question is, how does DARPA differentiate from ONR or AFOSR or Air Force Research Lab, the services, science and tech investments? First of all, it is a system, and we absolutely need all parts of that ecosystem working well for any of us to accomplish our missions. But our mission is distinct. Each of those service S&T activities is responsible for its services needs, often driven by known requirements, and there is a whole lot of very important, very hard technical work that they need to be doing. DARPA was created in the wake of Sputnik because, think back, it's 1957. We've just laid this federal foundation for investing in science and tech, right, in the post-World War II era, and we had just sort of built this model, and then Sputnik comes along, and Sputnik was a message that said, in that federal mix, you need a place whose day job is to think outside the box, think about surprises, isn't driven by what we already know we've got to work on, and that's DARPA's role. But of course, so that we come to work to do that, but the way we implement it is very much working with the rest of that ecosystem. Please, and then should we stop here? I don't want to blow the schedule here. Okay, great. How do we find and recruit passionate program managers? That's the whole ball game in one sentence. First of all, I only need about 30 or 40 a year, which is good because they're very hard to find. I find them from, first of all, my office directors are the ones who really find them, but where we look for them is anywhere. We look for them at early stages in their career, mid-stage, or late stage. They come from companies of all sorts. They come out of universities on loan. They come from other parts of government. So it's hard to see a pattern when you look at that. The characteristics that we look for are people who know the bits and atoms, know the deep details technically, and then have dynamic range so that they can navigate from that to applications, to what difference does it make, to how does it change the world, and back and forth with complete fidelity, number one. Number two, I need those dreamers who can see that, but I also need doers who can start really making something happen. And so the ability to execute, deliver results, work with lots of other people, because DARPA program managers don't go in the lab and do it themselves, but work with a bigger community and make that happen. Those are the kinds of characteristics that we look for, and then we roll the dice, and a lot of them end up being phenomenal program managers. Thank you all so much for the chance to be here.